Welcome to the second episode of your next great novel, The Story Behind the Story. Today, Denise and I will discuss 3 books, 2 that we read individually, and 1 that we both read and we'll have a discussion about. Denise, what have you read recently?
I've read All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brendan Kiely.
What's it about?
It's about 2 high school boys. They're acquaintances, but they're not friends. Rashad, who has a close-knit group of friends and family, is in the ROTC because his father thinks that's a good idea. One Friday after school, Rashad goes into a convenience store called Jerry's. He wants to get a drink and some chips. Earlier, he changed out of his ROTC uniform and placed it into the large duffel bag. His phone was also in that duffel bag. Rashad sits down the duffel bag and gets out his phone. A woman in the store trips over the bag and falls onto Rashad. The cashier and the police officer on duty think that Rashad was trying to steal from the store. The officer took Rashad outside and pummeled him after Rashad said it was just all an accident. The officer beat up Rashad so badly that he was in the hospital. Outside, there were witnesses, one of whom was Quinn, who saw the beating. Quinn knows the officer. It is his best friend's older brother who was a great support to Quinn when his father died. The book is told from Rashad's and Quinn's point of view. It's also a YA book.
So why did the officer beat up Rashad? Was he resisting in some way?
The officer said that he thought he was resisting, but really it was Rashad just sort of twisting and turning because he was getting beaten up so badly and he was in pain. It wasn't he was trying to resist arrest. He was just twisting and turning as anybody naturally would if they're in pain and being beaten and hurt.
The cop would have to hit him first in order for him to start twisting and turning in pain. So I don't see how he could be you know what I mean? How he could be resisting if
he put on the handcuffs and Rashad was twisting and turning a bit and said, look, this is all just an accident. It's an accident.
So he was getting mad because he was being restrained for no reason.
Right. But
from
he didn't. From his perspective. But Rashad didn't act overly, like he wasn't swearing. He wasn't totally freaking out. He was panicked and he was just trying to tell the officer what happened. Right, because he's this young kid in high school. He's never been in trouble before, and he was just trying to tell him what happened. And he was panicked, but he wasn't being disrespectful or trying to hurt the officer in any way.
What year was this book written? It was like
2015.
Oh, so this is recent. Okay,
yes.
So it's right out of the headlines of all the police shootings and whatnot.
Right,
that we've seen.
It is.
So, what did you like about the book?
I like that it's told from 2 different perspectives. It shows the struggles of both of the teenage boys.
So is one side, I don't want to give it away to listeners, but is one of the perspectives, obviously you have Rashad, who's the young man who was beaten,
right?
Correct? By the police officer. And then you have the other character, Quinn. Is Quinn on the side of the police?
Quinn isn't really sure. He thinks that the beating was horrendous. He doesn't like what he saw. He doesn't like that Rashad was hurt. He doesn't like that he saw a man that he knows and thinks is a good man beat up a young man so badly. But he's not really sure what to think, though he really truly does not like what he saw.
Right. But it puts him in a bit of a pickle because he's friendly with his best friend is the brother.
Yes.
Or his best friend's brother is the police officer.
Yes, and then those 2 families are very close, and so it definitely puts him in an uncomfortable situation between the families and what he's thinking, but what he knows in his heart and what he saw.
Right. So he feels like, hey, best friend's going to be like, hey, I'm your best friend. You need to stick up for my brother.
Right, my brother was just doing his job. Right. You need to see that, basically.
Right. Whereas the other kid's like, hey, you saw what happened. You need to tell the truth.
Yes.
Right. So that sounds like a very interesting story. We won't give away what happens. But so is there anything that you learned from the book?
There is definitely some twist that I didn't foresee in the beginning. And one of the things that I learned in the book is that it was reminded that everyone can unfairly judge another person regardless of ethnicity, age, social status, whatever it may be. I think it is a real reminder that it doesn't matter where you come from. Everybody can be unfairly judged in some way.
Do you think that everybody prejudges? Like if you see somebody on the street everybody makes these snap judgments before. They may not even be conscious, but do you think everybody prejudges?
I do. I mean, I hate to admit that because you would like to think more of yourself and more of others, because I like to pride myself in having a wonderful group of friends, a wonderful husband, you. But I think even as wonderful as somebody can be, I think that is what we do. Now, whether or not you can have enough empathy and enough foresight to say and stop yourself and say, okay, like that's not correct, that's not appropriate. I don't even think it needs to be.
Well, maybe it probably doesn't even get to that point,
right?
But, I think people make snap judgments on what they see, and then they act. They don't act according to their snap judgments if they're somewhat civilized,
right, especially if it's proven not true. I think sometimes it's just psychology. I mean, I think there's something innate in us that makes us feel uncomfortable if there's
differences,
right? If there's somebody coming along and they're
in-group.
Right, and they're acting very strangely, if they look very strange,
or they look different than you.
Right. I mean,
you might look strange to them,
of course,
and they look strange to you.
And I think a couple of things you can do for that is, first of all, realize what you're seeing, and the other thing is perhaps move for a short period of time. I think if you move away and you move to a more diverse area, or an area where people do look differently and act differently than you, then it does cause you to do that less. I think. I mean, I definitely think that happened with me.
Yeah, I agree with that. Was there anything? Well, we've already talked about some of the controversies, but what would you say was controversial about the book?
Well, the whole issue of social justice can be controversial. The idea behind it, I think, is a good one. I think it's a good-hearted one where we want to treat everybody fairly and make people look at those things. But sometimes that issue itself can be controversial because some people might not think that, a fair light is shed on an ethnicity or an occupation.
Right. We just watched The Hate U Give last night.
Yes.
And it's a book that I read. Denise hasn't read it yet, but she has it in her drawer.
Right.
We watched the movie last night, and I thought the book was more favorable towards the police than the movie was. The movie was much more biased, in my opinion, against the police and in favor of the protesters. Is that a big controversy in this book? Because it sounds to me like the antagonist is the police officer, and it's pretty cut and dry.
Right. I think that in The Hate U Give and in this book, I think that do present it in that light.
Do you think that power is something that corrupts people? We were talking about this earlier today, actually. And if you're a police officer, you have a lot of power over others. Every single day you go out there, you have the power to make somebody's life miserable if you want. Well, if somebody talks back to you, you have the power to shut them up. I mean, do you think that power, that day in and day out of having that power changes you as a person and corrupts you? It can corrupt you. I'm not saying it corrupts everybody, but there's that old saying, and I think it's a very true saying, is that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. What do you think about that?
I would agree. I think that power, I like to think of it this way, power can have the power to corrupt. And I think you have to be I think it takes a very strong person and very cognizant of that. I mean, I understand that to enforce the law, and you're put in a lot of situation as a police officer where you're dealing with people who are not going to want to listen to you, that are going to take offense. And you do have to take a hard line. You do have to demand that respect. But at the same time, has to be a way where it doesn't have to be completely devoid of empathy and being safe to even those who they may perceive as the criminal.
I wonder how realistic that is these days. One thing that concerns me is whether or not a lot of police officers are treating the public as if this was Iraq or Afghanistan. And having gone through the process many years ago, I know that the bulk of the police officers are ex-military, and the SWAT teams now and the militarization, they're getting a lot of weaponry from the federal government. There's been a militarization of police all over the United States, and in a lot of ways, they've acted that way, like it's become a militarized police force, and I don't think that that's good for the public. It's no longer Mayberry Andy Griffith. To Mayberry, by the way.
Right, we did. We were there. Not for very long, but
it's a very small town.
It's very small. One of the things, a few years ago, I went to the National Book Festival in D.C., and I was just simply crossing the street to get breakfast. And there was a police officer there. He was kind of acting like a traffic guard as well. But he had I'm not a gun person.
He
an
had
AR-15. Is that
well,
what
he
they
probably
have?
had an M4, which is the military version of it.
Okay, but I mean, all I saw was this high-powered rifle in his hand. I mean, not like a gun in a holster or anything. I mean, he had it sort of strapped over him, and I just thought to myself, "Is that really needed? Is that needed? I'm just crossing the street, and so is everyone else." It made me feel really uncomfortable. I know he had no beef with me. I was just crossing the street. I did what I was supposed to do. But at the same time, it made me really uncomfortable to say, is that what we need now? Is that the level where we are? I mean, are the police against its own people?
That's a good question. I don't know. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that maybe. Well, there's the statistic that got me into a lot of trouble. Mm-hmm. So I posted this article, and it was an article that stated some Bureau of Labor statistics that showed that Americans are essentially 55 times more likely, and I think maybe that stats have changed a little bit, so I think it's like 52 or 53 times more likely now to be killed we're 53 times more likely to be killed by a police officer than a terrorist. Now, part of that makes sense because there's not a lot of terrorism in the United States. For example, like the kid in Cleveland, watch the video, the police roll up into this park, and the kid was playing with a toy gun. And they rolled up to the park, and they got out of the car and just shot him. I mean, there's no, like, hands up, none of that. And maybe it was it might have been a pellet gun. I can't remember. And then I saw another one where the kid was in Walmart, and they rolled up and just came in and just shot him. I mean, there was no freeze, hands up. And I wonder if the training isn't, hey, we need to be very careful with our own lives, this being the police, and we're not going to take any chances. So anybody looks like they have a gun, we're going to put them down. If there's any threat of deadly force, we're going to put them down. And the problem I have with that is, if you want to be a hero, you have to take risks with your own life. Somebody that's a hero would say, freeze, I don't want to have to shoot you, put that down, not roll up and just cap them before they even raise the gun at you. That's no good. I just think that's I wonder if it's a problem with some of the training and some of the perception of the public being a battleground.
Right. I would agree with that. I've heard that before about is there a problem with the training? I mean, I talk about empathy, and I don't want to be unempathetic to police officers. I'm sure that, I mean, if I was in that situation, obviously I'm not trained, but I would be very scared as well. And I know I wouldn't want to put my own life in danger either. However, there has to be some kind of solution where just because something looks like a gun, just because something might be a toy gun, I mean, is that the training? Is that the training that we shoot? I mean, is it, I guess my question is it too much risk to say, and I'm not being like sarcastic, I'm really asking this question, is it too much risk to say, freeze, put your hands up, empty your hands, or whatever you can need to say? Is that, I mean, I'm asking, is that too much risk?
Well, it's not for the military. Yes, Mark, my brother Mark was in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he says that they couldn't engage unless they were shot at. Mm. So if the military can do that, why can't the police? So there were people in Iraq that were walking around with AK-47s all the time. You can't just go around and shoot them. So I don't really see why we would do that here at home, considering we have gun rights here, and people can open carry. There's no reason that anybody needs to be shot simply because that they have a gun. They have to be threatening. They have to be pointing that gun at you before you should even consider shooting anybody. That's one of the big issues I have with the shootings. What I think is bad is that this issue of police shootings has become a very racial issue, and I don't think it should be, because there are plenty of every race getting killed by police, and it shouldn't be happening. It's something that everybody should agree on or get together on and say, hey, we need to stop this. And to be fair to the police, they're expected to enforce a lot of laws that, in my opinion, are completely immoral.
Right.
And that's their job. They have to do it. I understand that. And maybe they don't fully understand the immorality of the drug war, the immigration war. 70% of the inmates in federal prison are for nonviolent offenses. So imagine how many people get killed, put into cages, or put into situations where they end up in a shootout simply because of, most of the time it's because of drugs. And you wonder how many people are being detained, arrested, and put into prison for years and years and years simply because they decided they wanted to do cocaine or crack or whatever it is. And the other big problem I see with that is all the people that do drugs, typically they are the most damaged and abused people in our society. You don't just start becoming a drug addict because you're a terrible person. A lot of times, most of these people, and if you look at the statistics again, most of these people were abused as children. They end up getting into drugs. It's one of the ways that they can feel better. And they end up getting arrested. They end up being abused by the police. They end up being abused by the prison system and the other inmates. And then they get out of prison eventually, and they're totally broken. We take the most vulnerable people in our society, arrest them, lock them up, and treat them and bully them in prisons. And I just think that that's the wrong way to handle something that shouldn't be a crime. It should be something that it's a sickness, and it's something that should be handled as these people have a problem that they need help. We should help them, not throw them into prison and where they're sexually assaulted and beaten.
Right. I mean, it should be handled like a mental illness. Typically, the person they're hurting is themselves.
So would you recommend this book to others?
I would. The book is a young adult novel. It is an interesting read. The characterization and dialogue are fabulous. It's wonderful, extremely real. Reminded me of your books. That's one thing I love about your books. However, with that authenticity, the F word is used quite a bit throughout the book.
So what would you give this as far as a star rating?
As far as a star rating, I thought it was a very good read. There is a twist in it that I really think is great. I'd probably give it between a 4.5 or a 4.8, just because I would like just a little bit more high-level drama. But other than that, I thought it was a great read. It's definitely worth your time.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. So, what have you read recently?
The book I want to talk about, I read Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
What's it about?
It's a coming-of-age novel about a young man named Mike Munoz he's struggling to find his identity and purpose in life and to make a decent living. He's a landscaper that's especially precise with his edging and topiary. I don't know if you know what topiary is. It's like making little animals out of shrubbery. And
okay.
Like out of something you might see at like Disney World or actually Hershey down the road. That's kind of topiary where they have, does it say Hershey chocolate in barberry bushes?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be topiary. So in one way, the book portrays the death of the American dream, the unfairness of the system. But on the other hand, it shows that no matter how far you fall, because he falls pretty far, it's possible to get back up and to make an effort, and you never know. You might get that piece of the American dream.
So what did you like about the book?
I thought the author did a good job portraying the struggles of the lower class as they try to eke out a living. He kind of shows how they're always one bad break away from disaster.
Reminds me of the book, The American Poor, or the
Working Poor?
Yeah, The Working Poor. That's it.
That was a nonfiction book.
That's a nonfiction book, great, that we both read. That reminds me of The Working Poor, where they have a job, but it's not a very high-paying job, and therefore they don't have the means to get everything fixed or fixed to the point where they would like it. And so one thing breaks down, and
one thing leads to another.
It's a domino effect, and here their car breaks down, and then they can't get to work, and then they lose their job.
Right. Or worse, they get a ticket, they can't afford to pay it, they end up in jail. I mean, there's all sorts of bad things happen when you're living paycheck to paycheck and you have no cushion. As soon as the furnace breaks down, or this is what you see a lot of times around here, when it gets really cold, people start having their house burned down. And why does that happen? Well, it's because their furnace is in disrepair. Maybe the repairman came and red tagged it because they couldn't afford to replace it. So guess what? They're using the oven to heat their house, or a open propane heater, or whatever they have to heat the house, and then they burn the house down. So it's just one disaster away. And while I was reading the book, I felt constantly worried about money because I'm feeling uneasy when the main character because there would be times where he was able to make a little money, and then he splurged on something that was, a nice meal or something like that. And I'm thinking, don't waste your money on that crap. But I understand why he did. He wants to live just like everybody else. The book kind of reminded me of an article I read about the lower class, and one of the things that really stuck with me, and it's funny, we actually talked about this the other night too, is there was an overweight woman, and she said that she bought and ate sweets because sugar is something that's cheap, that she can afford, and eating sweets is one of the only pleasures that she has. And I just thought that was so unbelievably sad.
So was there any controversy about the book?
The book was a strong indictment of American capitalism. It portrays most of the bosses as some combination of greedy, lazy, dishonest, uncaring. I think this isn't actually the case for most small business owners. The average small business owner is only making $70,000, and they work their butts off. I can tell you right now, I know because I am a small business owner now, and I've been one in the past. I've had multiple businesses. So I understand what the reality is. And I understand the popularity of demonizing business owners. But in my opinion, the vast majority of business owners are hardworking people that are struggling just like everyone else. And there's a big difference between someone who owns a plumbing business or a landscaping business, as I did, and the CEO of Bank of America. I think that's where the business owners get a bad rap, because there is so much corrupt capitalism in this country that the people that are running honest businesses, which is most of the small business owners. Otherwise, if you're not running an honest business, you're not going to have clients. If you're not paying your people enough, they'll go work somewhere else.
So back to the book. Would you recommend this to others?
I would. I enjoyed the novel. I thought it was entertaining. There's a bit of a liberal political angle, which I've sort of alluded to, but I still enjoyed the story and the characters. And there is a pretty big twist in there that I have not even mentioned, and I won't. But there is a pretty big twist that's kind of interesting. I'd give it a 4 out of 5 stars.
Okay.
So let's shift gears and talk about a book that both you and I read. And this is a book by John Ronson, and the title is So You've Been Publicly Shamed. It's a nonfiction book. It's about modern day shamings. The modern day shamings they're typically through the internet and social media, but the consequences are very, very real. For the past 3 years, John Ronson, he traveled the world meeting recipients of high-profile public shamings. The shamed people are just regular people like us, people who maybe made a joke on social media that came out badly or made a mistake at work. And once their transgressions are revealed, there's collective outrage that circles with the force of a hurricane. And next thing they know, they're being torn apart by an angry mob. I say torn apart metaphorically, of course, jeered at, demonized, and sometimes even fired from their job. So this great renaissance of public shaming is sweeping the land. Justice has been democratized. The silent majority are getting a voice. And what are they doing with their voice? They're mercilessly finding people's faults. They're defining the boundaries of normality by ruining the lives of those outside it. And they're using shame as a form of social control. So that's essentially what the book's about. What did you like about the book?
Well, I like that he tried, John Ronson. I like how he tried to tell the story without bias. I also liked how it showed how powerful social media can be and how it made me think how others should be more empathetic online. What did you think?
I like the way John Ronson asks questions. I find the dialogue between him and his interview subjects, at times it was actually very funny and very interesting. I think he sheds a light on a very important an overlooked subject. I think most people that have participated in these online shamings don't see anything wrong at all with it. If anything, I think they think the opposite, that they're doing something good for society. Of course, it's not always as simple as it appears online. You're actually a bit of an expert on the topic of shaming. You've read a lot of Brene Brown's books on shame. Can you talk a little bit about what shame actually does to people?
I wouldn't say an expert. It's just, it is something that I've read up a bit on. Some psychologists argue that shame can be good because it can change behaviors. But what it really does is that it makes the people who are being shamed, or the people that are feeling the shame, that they think that that's who they are, that they're a shameful person, that is part of their persona, that is who they are, instead of just a person who made a poor choice or made a mistake. Was there anything that you found particularly interesting about So You've Been Publicly Shamed?
I thought that the shaming of Justine Sacco and Lindsey Stone were very, very interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about exactly what happened. It's not going to ruin the book, I don't think, but it is some couple of things that were in the book. I found their situations to be very human and very compelling. To give people a background, in 2013, Justine Sacco was 30 years old, and she was a senior director of corporate communications at IAC. She made a very long trip from New York to South Africa to visit her family during the holidays. During the trip, she made a couple of tweets. One about a fellow passenger on her flight. So she tweeted, "Weird German dude, you're in first class. It's 2014. Get some deodorant." In her monologue, "As I inhale BO, thank God for pharmaceuticals." So she, it's just kind of a little bit rude, a little bit.
Yeah, it was definitely rude, but she was trying to be funny. It wasn't appropriate.
I think she's trying to be a little bit edgy.
Right.
And then she had a layover in Heathrow, and she tweeted, "Chili, cucumber sandwiches, bad teeth, back in London." Again, a little bit edgy, trying to be funny. And then before her final leg, which is her trip to South Africa, she tweeted, "Going to Africa, hope I don't get AIDS, just kidding, I'm white." So she pressed send on the last one, and then she wandered around Heathrow Airport for about half an hour, sporadically checking her phone. No one actually replied to her tweet initially, and she only had, I think, 170 Twitter followers. So no one had replied, and that didn't particularly surprise her. Sacco boarded the plane, and she slept it was an 11-hour flight. She slept. When the plane landed in Cape Town, she turned on her phone. Right away, she got a text from someone she hadn't spoken to since high school, and the text said, "I'm so sorry to see what's happening." Justine looked at it, confused. Then she got a ton of texts and a phone call from her best friend, Hannah. During that 11-hour flight, her tweet, the one about AIDS, had become the top trending tweet on Twitter, and not in a good way. Also, the hashtag "Has Justine Landed Yet" became one of the top trending hashtags worldwide. Twitter users wanted to see her face when she landed and realized the disaster that she was in. So Justine was shamed on social media with tweets like, here, I'll give you an example of some of the tweets that was written. "How did @Justine Sacco get a PR job? Her level of racist ignorance belongs on Fox News. Hashtag AIDS can affect anyone." Even her employer piled on, and her employer tweeted, "This is an outrageous, offensive comment. Employee in question currently unreachable on an international flight." Justine Sacco was fired from her job, totally humiliated. Do you think that the punishment fit the crime?
I don't agree with what she said. I don't think that those kind of jokes are overly funny. Even though the last one was the most damning, I actually think that she was making a counterpoint that, oh, this is what people think. They think they can't get AIDS because they're white. And she's like, I think she was just trying to be funny, saying how ridiculous that thought is. That's how I took it. So I almost think that she was, even though it was horrendous, and AIDS is not something to be, it's a horrendous disease. It's not something to joke about. However, I actually think that she was almost being less if we want to lack for a better word, racist than some of the other comments, even though that one, it deals directly with AIDS. And I understand why that.
Do you think the other comments are racist?
Well, I think the other comments are just more, I don't know if it's racist or
no
more
racism in the
well,
other
it's
comments.
like stereotypic.
Okay.
It's like somebody
right.
who is not American has BO or
bad teeth.
That English people
have
bad teeth and all they eat is cucumber sandwiches. And just because some of those things may exist doesn't mean that that's every person. So I think that those jokes were definitely off color. I didn't really think that they were funny, but I actually think the last one, even though it dealt with a more serious issue, I think that she was trying to be ironic and saying like, oh my gosh, this is so ridiculous. Somebody who thinks just because you're white, you couldn't get AIDS is so ridiculous. So I don't think that the punishment fit the crime. I think it was a stupid joke. It was a very poor choice on her part, obviously, to tweet that out. She has about as many followers as I do. My Twitter account is just professional Twitter account, so I don't typically tweet out jokes, but I think that a better punishment or a better addressing what she tweeted would be her followers just saying, hey, Justine, I get that you're just trying to be funny, but this really isn't funny. This is really, bordering on some things that are pretty serious. I think your comments can be misconstrued as racist, and it's really not funny. Can you take those tweets down? I think that she would have gotten the message. I think that would have been a much more appropriate way of handling her situation. What do you think should have been done?
I think Justine Sacco, I agree that she was trying to be funny. I think she's trying to be edgy. And I do think that how quick people are to just scream racism these days is out of control. I mean, I understand how important this issue is to people, but in my opinion, it's gotten out of control to where people are screaming racism for every little thing that people do. And the bottom line is, in my opinion, I think everyone on this planet is racist to a certain extent. Not that they're going to, I don't think most people would do anything that is harmful to someone just because of the color of their skin. Some people would, but most people I think wouldn't. But again, we talked about it earlier. When you look at somebody, you're prejudging them. You're making snap decisions. You are already have a inherent bias in favor of people that look like you. And I don't know that screaming racist anytime somebody says something that you don't like is a way of bringing people together. I think if anything, it's pushing us further and further apart, and that's one of the big problems.
I was just going to say that I think that it definitely pushes us further apart. I don't think that off-color comments are okay, but I think a better way of handling it is kind of what I said with how I think that it should have been handled with Justine. I think it should have been handled with people that are
with empathy, right?
With empathy and people that are close to her. I think the way that we handle any of this is getting to know each other for individuals.
Right. I agree with you on getting to know people as individuals. I think that this identity politics that people play now, where everybody's looking at this collectivist group, are you this skin color or that skin color? Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you gay or straight or whatever it is that people want to classify other people and put them into some sort of a group and peg them into some sort of a hole. And I think that we should... Ideally, we treat people as individuals because every single person is different in their own way. No two people are exactly the same. So going back to Justine Sacco, I think what should have happened was, and I think we've talked about this, is that some people should have posted on her Twitter that they thought her tweet was racist, that they thought it was unkind, whatever they wanted to say to her. And then, if that happened to me, if I put something out on my social media and somebody came back to me and said, hey, that really bothered me for X, Y, and Z reason. If I thought that it was legit, that I'm like, okay, I see that point of view. Now I feel bad. I would take it down and I would actually feel bad. And that would be enough. That's enough shame for a person, in my opinion. The other person I mentioned earlier was Lindsey Stone. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story about her. She worked for a company called LIFE, which stands for Living Independently Forever. The organization helps adults with disabilities. Lindsey Stone was on a work trip to the Arlington National Cemetery, and there was a sign that read, "Silence and Respect." Lindsey's work friend took a picture of her cupping one hand to her mouth as if she was yelling and giving the middle finger with the other. So she was making fun of the silence and the respect part. And she ended up posting the photo on Facebook. Initially, a few people said, "Hey, that's offensive." And Lindsey replied with a post that said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, wait. This is just us being the douchebags that we are, challenging authority in general. Much like the pic posted the night before of me smoking right next to a no smoking sign. Obviously, in all caps, we meant no disrespect to people that serve or have served our country." Lindsey and her work friend, they discussed taking down the post, but they figured it would blow over. Of course, it didn't blow over. It did the exact opposite, fueled in large part by a Facebook group called Fire Lindsey Stone. Lindsey was in fact fired and shamed, and her life was essentially ruined, much the same as Justine Sacco. Any thoughts on whether or not that punishment fit the crime?
I don't think that she deserved to lose her job and be humiliated. Some of her following did question what she said, and as you said, they did address it, but they elected to keep the post up, which turned out to be a poor decision, obviously.
Yeah, so I think they'd like to have that one back. Do you think it was offensive to the military?
Obviously, it was offensive to the military. I can understand why people would be offended. I wasn't personally offended, but if I'm trying to be completely fair here, maybe I would be offended if I had a loved one die in combat.
Okay, hold on. I have a scenario for you. So let's say there was a school shooting.
Okay.
And 10 teachers died.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was memorial, and there was like a memorial put up for these teachers. And then there was a guy that went on there, and it said silence and respect, and he was giving the middle finger and doing the thing, and they posted that online. Basically, F you teachers. Would it be offensive to you?
I would be more, yes, I would be more offended. Do I think that guy should be humiliated and totally lose his job? No. However, if we're going to have freedom of speech, we have to have freedom of speech. I mean, I think you also have the right to say back, "Hey, it's really inappropriate. Are you really thinking about what you're saying?"
Right, but freedom of speech. Now, Justine Sacco, in fairness, Justine Sacco and Lindsey Stone all had freedom of speech.
Yes,
they were free to post whatever they wanted to, however offensive comments they wanted to post, and whatever they wanted to say. Nobody was arrested. Right. So, according to the law, they had freedom of speech. They were socially shamed on social media using the internet. So there's a bit of a difference there, but
they did lose their jobs.
Oh yeah, they definitely lost their job, but again, they didn't lose their freedom of speech.
You know, it just makes me think with both these instances, whatever happened to friends and family to help us keep in check? Come on, we've all said stupid things as kids, as young adults, as adults. Whatever happened to good friends and family, obviously, to help keep us in check, to keep us on the right track when we've said stupid things. I know college roommates of mine have said things to me, "Hey, I don't like it that you said that." And it was just an innocent joke. I meant nothing to hurt anybody's feelings, but it did keep me in check. I shouldn't have said what I said. I think I was making fun of somebody's outfit, and they said, "Hey, Denise, you're a nice person. I don't understand why you'd say something like that. It's not funny. It's offensive." And I said, "You know what? You're right." And they had every right to say that to me, but that was a good friend who was trying to keep me in check because they felt like I'm better than that I don't need to say those types of things to try to be funny. And it's not healthy to have this online mom mentality that's just waiting for the next person to humiliate. I think that's a terrible way to be. So, Phil, what do you think about Lindsey Stone? Do you think she deserved the punishment?
I think what Lindsey Stone did probably offended Americans more than what Justine Sacco did, because Americans in general are very sensitive to any disrespect to soldiers. For example, remember how mad people got at Colin Kaepernick for kneeling for the national anthem? It's a similar deal. Now, in fairness, I think that on the scale of people's outrage, Colin Kaepernick got more outrage, but what Colin Kaepernick did was way less disrespectful. Like if you were to measure the two, kneeling versus giving the middle finger at a cemetery, I think, right. So, but you see how upset people got. So I think that Lindsey Stone struck more of a nerve than Justine Sacco. But again, it's another instance of mob justice, and that's wrong in my opinion. Whose behavior is worse? Do you think the person who made the racist or offensive post online, or the people that shame them into submission?
I think that the people who did the shaming, because what they said was much worse than the original comment, and Lindsey Stone and Justine Sacco were also getting death threats.
Right, I agree. The hate that they put out into the world came back 1,000-fold, in my opinion. So, yes, I agree that the people that were jumping on the mob mentality bandwagon were worse. Nobody would have even seen her dumb racist comment if it wouldn't have been reshared and retweeted and all these comments. And if people would have just ignored her, then none of this would have even come out.
Right. I was thinking about what if this same situation happened back in the 90s. And I was thinking, let's say a friend of ours took a picture of themselves doing that, and they just took it with like your regular little camera, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you got to see this picture I took of myself." When we were there, we just being such douchebags. Look at what we did, and they thought that you or I would laugh, and we would say, "Hey, look, I know you're being kind of funny, but that's kind of offensive. Like, I wouldn't show that picture to anybody else." And then it would be done, and that's how it would have been handled in the 90s. But we live in a very different world today, and I think we really need to think about that.
Yeah, it's scary because if you're a young kid and you've put your whole life online, it's a lot of content, and you're never going to make a mistake. You're never going to say something that could be construed in a way that would be offensive to somebody. Well, then you're not saying anything. I think this idea that we can just jump on anybody who says something that we don't like and then ruin their life, I think that's shameful.
Yes, I would agree.
So would you recommend Jon Ronson's So You've Been Publicly Shamed to Others?
Yes, I would. It's interesting. It makes you think more deeply about shame and the lack of empathy online. What about you? Would you recommend the book?
I would. I really liked it. I think it's an entertaining, and it's an important book. I'd give it 5 stars. That's it for this episode of Your Next Great Novel. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or SoundCloud.